I'm going to show you the automations in Duik, which are automatic animations in this automation and expressions panel in Duik. Let's start with the most well-known and most used, the wiggle I'm going to show you in this simple scene. So the wiggle is a random animation of any property. For example, here I can pick the rotation of this boat and add the wiggle. When doing this, the wiggle is added with an effect to control it, which is similar to the wiggle you can do with expressions, except you have a few more options. Let's adjust the amplitude and the frequency, which is the speed of the wiggle. An option you don't have when you use the wiggle with expressions is the ability to loop the wiggle, which is by default the duration of the composition. For example, here, if I need a loop which lasts 10 seconds, I can set this loop duration to 10 seconds. And let's adjust the work area here just to show you that it perfectly loops. So with this simple value, I know the wiggle is looping. And in the details, you'll find the complexity and multiplier, which are available with expression wiggles, which are used to do a wiggle on a wiggle. It's a kind of fractal wiggle. It adds more details in the animation. It may be very useful. And you have this random seed to adjust the animation, to change the wiggle you have. And it should be the same for all properties on the same layer, but you can deactivate this with the one seed per layer checkbox here. If I deactivate this, each property will have a different wiggle, even if on the same layer. And you'll see that you can also do this on the position, but here you'd like to have a bigger amplitude on the y-axis than the x-axis. So I'm just going to split the values. And this way I can adjust both axes separately. For example, I can have a smaller value on x than on the y-axis. And this way I can adjust to have a bigger wiggle on the vertical axis. And finally, we can do the same with the camera here, to the position and the rotation. Of course, here, you don't want the same wiggle on both properties, so I can select both of them, but ask for individual controls, so that I have a separate wiggle for each property, instead of one for both. And let's just deactivate the rotation wiggle to adjust precisely the position wiggle. Let's add a small value on the x-axis and a bit bigger value on the y-axis with the same frequency, and set the loop to 10 seconds, and then activate again the wiggle on the rotation to set it. And finally, one small tip: you should know that with the wiggle in Duik, you can animate the frequency, which doesn't work with the wiggle in expressions. It works in Duik. Let me show you another tool, which I've called the swink, for swing and blink. We are going to use this on this pendulum. So it's on the rotation that I want to use this swing effect. So there are two options, swing and blink, which are actually just presets for the effects. So it doesn't really matter which one you choose. So let's use the swing here. And by default, there are no value at all, so no movement, but I can just say that it's going to swing from -15 degrees, for example, to 15 degrees. And now the pendulum swings from one side to the other. You can change the frequency, of course. If this is a clock 1, may be good, or maybe 0.5. It takes 1 second to go from one side to the other. And what's interesting in this swing is that you have a few more options. For example, you can, if you need, offset the cycle so that it starts at another time. And you can use this A-B ratio. That means how much time you spend on the A value compared to the B value. If you raise this value, you'll see that now the movement is asymmetrical, and one side is faster than the other. The plateau value can be used to stay fixed on the values at the extreme values, and you can choose the duration of this plateau on each side. So actually, a blink is a plateau with 100%. And finally, you can adjust the interpolation between these values, which by default is a perfectly smooth value curve. You can switch to hold, square, which is a blink. If ever you need it, you can switch to linear, but what's interesting are the other options, especially the smooth we've seen and the natural motion, Gaussian interpolation. This is an asymmetrical curve. It means the acceleration and the deceleration are not exactly the same. So you can have more interesting motion like this, where the start is faster than the slowdown, and it may be more dynamic like this. 0 is extreme, around 5 it's kind of symmetrical, and after 5 it's reversed. It's the acceleration which is slower. Using this, you can be very precise on the interpolation and the options of this swing. And you have these two other interpolations if ever you need this. And you can also blink values. Let me show you that it works on any kind of property. For example, here, let's blink the color of the circle at the bottom part of the pendulum. So let's just select this color and add a blink on this. And we can now choose between these two values automatically. So they're by default around the previous value. These values are added to the previous value. So if it's black, you get the original one. And here you can add a value which is added to the original one. Let's set the same frequency as the swing above. And if the color changes a bit too late, I think it could change a bit earlier. So I'm going to use the cycle offset to adjust the exact time where I want the color to switch. And finally, I could use a smooth interpolation instead of the square, and using the plateau so it still blinks, kind of, but with a fading, a transition between the two values. Let's invent the wheel. So the wheel is pretty easy to use in Duik. Let's just select the layer and click on the wheel button. Automatically, Duik rigs this rotation so that it rolls correctly. By default, it's made to roll on a horizontal plane. That's the best setting to improve the performance. It's really fluid. But you can change this in the settings. First, for example, if you need the wheel to roll on the ceiling, you have to reverse the rotation. So that's easy. Now you'll have an issue if, for example, the ground is like this, not horizontal. In this case, the wheel is going to slide a little bit. As soon as the ground is not horizontal, you need to change from horizontal to straight in the trajectory. This will work, but you have to know that when you're using this option, you absolutely need to add an animation, for example, a few keyframes, but it could be an expression, to actually see the effects and that the wheel now rolls correctly on this plane if the trajectory is a straight line. Now, if you need to follow a curve, in this case, you'll see that, again, this doesn't work and the wheel is going to slide a bit instead of rolling on the curve. In this case, switch again to curved. Be careful, this is the setting with the worst performance, but it works perfectly with all kinds of trajectory, as you can see. And now you can animate this wheel. the move away and the motion tray tools. So here in this example, we have a centered object, let's say it's a planet or a sun, and a satellite or another planet rotating around it. The satellite is the child of the planet. Now, if I wanted to animate the position of this satellite so it gets closer or moves away from the planet, it's kind of complicated in After Effects because you'd have to animate both values of the position, x and y, to perfectly align the trajectory. And this is a bit too difficult, so let's use Duik. When a layer is the child of another layer, the move away moves it on the virtual line going through the center of the parent. So you can easily animate the distance between the satellite and the planet here. What's useful with this is that, of course, you can combine it, for example, with the swing, so that this object comes closer and gets away from the planet. So if I synchronize this swing with the rotation of the planet, which rotates 50 degrees per second, which is 7.2 seconds for a complete turn, then I can use this in the frequency 1 divided by 7.2, the duration of the cycle. And now the satellite follows an kind of elliptical orbit around the planet. The two values in the swing are the values at the closest point of the planet, and the other one is the value at the extreme opposite. What's nice with this is you can combine it again with something else. The motion tray, for example, in Duik. Select the layer and click on the motion tray button. This creates a path which follows the object wherever it goes. It doesn't matter its parent and the exact trajectory. And of course, you can adjust this stroke as you wish with the color, the width, the taper. You can also, if you wish, adjust the length of the stroke by setting the number of frames before or after the object, and offset the path. For example, that's useful if you want to have several motion trays. To add other ones, just select the object and click again on motion tray. It adds a new motion tray in the same layer. I can copy and paste the settings and just offset this new copy and maybe change its length. And we could even add a third one. Click again on motion tray. And let's copy and paste the settings again and just offset this one on the other side. If there is a bump at the loop, it's because the motion trail or the swing is not correctly computed before the composition. So just offset the work area. So you start on the next loop where everything has been pre-computed. In the advanced options, you can switch from the simple mode to the advanced mode. And this may be interesting because in this case, the motion tray width is going to adapt to the scale of the object, or it's the position if it's a 3D layer. So you can animate the scale. For example, let's use again a swing in the scale of the satellite and synchronize it by using the same frequency. So copy and paste the frequency. Okay. And when it's closer, let's say it's smaller, so -25 at the closest point on both axes. And on the other side, 25% on both axes. And now, if you switch all these motion trays to the advanced mode and check the Use 3D and Scale box, then the trail is going to adapt automatically to the scale of the layer. And this would work if it was a 3D layer animated in its depth in the z-axis. And now I'm going to show you the random motion. So this is different than the wiggle. It's completely random without any interpolation. It generates random values. So this may be an eye, and we can use this random motion in the position to improve the movement of the eye and makes it look more alive. So let's add some random motion in this. Let's raise the frequency. And as you can see, it's really random. So let's lower the amplitude so that it moves just a little bit. So a very small amplitude, and lower again the frequency. You'll see that when you add this random motion, it removes all interpolations in the keyframes. But that's not a big problem, because we can just create a parent to this layer, a null or a controller, and use the random motion in this controller. Let's just copy the expression from the position and paste it in the position of this new controller. So that's all we need to do. And now we have this nice random bumps and the animation of the eye, which feels more alive like this. I'm now going to show you a specific automation which is called the Kleaner, with a K. This is not a typo, it means keyframe cleaner, so it's the Kleaner. As its name suggests, it's going to clean your animation, which means do the details of the animation. For example, here, if I just add a couple of keyframes to animate the rotation of these objects, like this, then with this very simple animation, and bad animation actually, I can just select these keyframes and use the Kleaner. So you have a lot of presets here. Let's take the first one for now, to automatically animate, improve, and actually animate your objects in just a single click from linear simple keyframes with the anticipation before the movement and an interpolation during the motion, slow down and follow through at the end. If you have a look at the animation curve, you'll see that using these just two simple keyframes, you have a correct animation with the anticipation, the overshoot, everything you need for a nice animation. Of course, you can adjust all of this using the settings in the effects of the layer where you add the Kleaner. So there are two ways to adjust this. You can either use the general parameters at the top, which are easier values to set, more intuitive, like the size, weight, strength, wheel, flexibility, and the friction of the air or the water, the environment. So these are the intuitive parameters. They are unitless, they're arbitrary values to just rise or lower the settings. Just under, you have more detailed settings where you can go into more details to adjust independently each part of the animation, the anticipation before the movement, the motion interpolation in between the keyframes during the motion, the overlap, I'll talk about this a bit later, there's no overlap in this rotation, the follow-through, which is the overshoot at the end, the soft-body we'll see later, and you can even add some limits to avoid the objects to go outside a predefined range. And then you have more advanced settings you're going to use less. For example, here with this object, I can raise the weight, and the Kleaner tries to adjust the animation so the object looks heavier. It does what it can with the few keyframes we have here, but it tries and improves the animation according to your settings. If you raise the wheel, for example, this influences the anticipation, but also the way the object stops, because as it has some wheel, it's able to stop by itself. On the contrary, if you set the wheel to 0, you won't have any anticipation anymore, but more follow-through at the end. Flexibility influences more this follow-through. With less flexibility, you have this faster movement, but with a higher flexibility, more like with a rope that's something elastic, then the follow-through is much smoother. The friction influences how much time the object needs to actually stop. If you raise the friction, it stops sooner If you have less friction, then the object moves much longer. So these are intuitive settings, which should be easy to use. And if you want, you can go into more details for each part of the animation. For example, here, you can change the anticipation at the beginning here to either have more anticipation by raising the anticipation value, and then you have the object moves more backwards before it starts. And if you raise the duration, it starts the movement sooner according to the rest of the animation. For example, here you can exaggerate the anticipation a lot. The motion interpolation controls what's happening in between the keyframes. If you lower the value, then the interpolation is made by the keyframes, by the tangents you're going to use, the ease from After Effects. If you raise this value, then it's the Kleaner which handles the whole interpolation. So the tangents won't do anything anymore. Use After Effects spatial trajectory is a checkbox you're going to use with the position, not on the rotation like here. We'll see the overlap later. And the follow-through is the end of the animation where you can adjust manually the flexibility and the duration if you wish. You can also amplify or, on the contrary, lower this follow-through according to your needs. So this is a quite simple tool, but very, very powerful, and you'll get a lot of time for many animations. You have to know that the Kleaner automatically adapts to the keyframes you're going to add to your animation. For example, here, the object stops and then starts again. You do have the right animation when it stops, the follow-through, then a new anticipation, and start again to have the follow-through again at the end. So the Kleaner respects your keyframes. If the object stops during the animation, you'll have the anticipation. And you can even add intermediary keyframes like this in between. And the Kleaner does what it can to go through your keyframes, but cleaning the animation anyway. So using this, you can animate only with linear keyframes, but have nice animation without working a lot. And the keyframes are used only to say to the Kleaner, okay, I need this object to go through this value at this specific time, and the rest is done by the Kleaner. It works in the position also too, of course. In the position, it's going to use the trajectory. For example, here, if you have just a couple of keyframes and a trajectory like this, let's add the Kleaner. So you have the anticipation and follow through, and it follows the trajectory automatically. And when you use the Kleaner on the position, if you need a third keyframe in between or more, for example, if you need this keyframe to adjust the trajectory, just switch these keyframes to ROV across time, so that you can use the keyframes to adjust the trajectory as you wish, but it's the Kleaner who's going to handle the details of the animation and the interpolation. You have to know that it also works with children and parents. If you add the Kleaner in any spatial property, for example, the position of this child layer, then you don't even need keyframes on this position so to make it work. Even if the keyframes are on the parent, then the Kleaner is going to handle the animation of the child automatically. Let me show you. I'm just animating the parent layer, and automatically the child layer, which has the Kleaner, adapts and has this overlap and follow-through animation. The overlap can be set and adjusted in the overlap section in the effects to amplify or reduce it. Of course, the parent itself can have the Kleaner so that both of them are perfectly animated using only 2 keyframes. And now you can automatically make a child follow its parent in an elastic way like this. And if you need to adjust this elasticity, you can use the overlap percentage or the settings on top, for example, the flexibility, to adjust this automatically, especially the weight too, for this specific case, or use the overlap percentage. This, which works on the position, works on any spatial property, especially on puppet pins. For example, here, let's create a puppet effect on these objects. I can just select the puppet pins and use the Kleaner on them. And after doing this, I can just animate the position to have this soft body automatically. Of course, the position itself can have the cleaner to have a nice animation like this, really easy in just a couple of keyframes. So instead of creating a new cleaner on the position, I could also just, to have the same settings on all properties, just copy the expression from one of the puppet pins to paste it in the position so that I have one cleaner effect to set the settings for all the properties. And I can, for example, change the size of the object, which changes the overlap on the sides, change the flexibility, adjust everything. So this is the cleaner. And just to show you, you can also, in the follow-through, check the bounce effect to make the object bounce on the last value. So you have this nice bouncing automatically, which you can adjust with the flexibility and the friction, for example. Be careful, because using the puppet tool won't work on shape layers, because you cannot animate the position of a shape layer if it has a puppet effect. You have to pre-compose it first. And finally, using all of this, you can redo the very simple and usual bouncing ball exercise, animation exercise. Just separate the dimensions of the position of your ball to add just a couple of keyframes on the X position like this, and use an inanimate cleaner on this so that it rolls and stops very easily at the end. You can then rise the friction so you won't have any bouncing effect at the end, it just stops. Okay, and on the Y position, you just need a couple of keyframes, one at the top and one at the bottom, where the ball is going to bounce, and then let the cleaner do the job for you. Of course, you also need in the Y position, the cleaner for the Y position to check the bounce checkbox in the follow-through options so that the ball bounces automatically. Of course, you can adjust this with the flexibility, for example, and all of the settings. You can adjust how the ball is going to bounce. So this is the cleaner, which is very useful for lots of different kinds of animations. These options are just presets. Everything applies the same cleaner, but with predefined values different according to your needs. If, for example, you need just only a bounce or just adding limits, you can use this. We're now going to quickly rig this robot to apply what we've learned in previous tutorials. It uses custom controllers, which work the same way as Duik controllers, with the complete rig for the legs, and you'll see that this is stretchy. You can pull the leg, but you can also play with the side and foreshortening of the leg. The controller above moves the body. You can play with the character as you wish. And the head controller, you'll see that the neck is stretchy too. So let's read this character together. It's just a Photoshop file which has been imported with the controllers, which are just simple Photoshop layers. The first step, as always, is to create the bones we need for this character. So let's start with the legs. To quickly create the leg at the right location, let's just draw a Bezier path on a shape layer like this. Keep it selected and just go create the leg. I'm just making sure it's the right side because this is the right leg. It's the right of the character. And we can now do the same with the left leg. And finally, the spine. So here, let's choose the layer we need. There are hips, a neck, and the head. Hips, no layer for the spine, neck and head. The anchor point for the hips is going to be a bit under the layer, like this. It will be more natural when it moves later. The anchor point of the neck just above, and the anchor point for the head a bit higher like this, around the mouth and the tip. Now the bones have been created, we can parent all the layers of the character. So we don't want to parent the controllers. Let's bring them on top and not select them. and just select all the bones and all the layers of the character and click on Link Art in the Bones panel in Duik. Duik uses the name of the layers to parent them automatically to what it finds in the bones. It couldn't parent the eyes and the mouth because there are no bones for them, so let's parent them manually to the head, to the bone of the head, and same for the antenna, which is the child of the bone of the head. Now, everything seems to be correctly parented. Let's just check quickly by rotating the bones. Okay. If everything has been correctly named, it should be correctly parented by Duik. And now that this is done, we can auto-rig this character, but we want to use our own controllers. So for each controller, I'm just going to move the anchor point to the corresponding bone, the one which is controlled. Here it's the foot. Move the anchor point, and to perfectly align the controller on the bone, in the Links and Constraint panel, click on Align Layers, move the anchor point, select the layer to align, and click on Align. Here it's the body, so move the anchor point to the hips, select the hip bone, and click on Align Layers. Here it's the neck, move the anchor point to the bone of the neck, select it, and Align Layers. And finally the head, same, move the anchor point to the bone of the head, select it, and click on Align Layers. We'll see the antenna later, let's just hide it for now. All these layers are controllers, so we need to tell Duik these are controllers. In the controller panel, click on Tag as Controllers, so that Duik knows these will be our controllers. Keep them selected, select the bones, and just run the auto rig. And the rig is ready, so this works correctly. Let's just hide all these bones and test this. The legs work, but it's not stretchable yet, but we'll see that later. On the body, Duik adds a hips controller, which does exactly the same as the body controller we have here. So this controller, we can just hide it and tell Duik this is not a controller anymore, it's another type of layer. So in the tools layer, I'm just changing the type to, for example, null, and apply, and move it under with the bones. Here it moves the body, here we have the neck controller, which you're going to use with the rotation mostly, and the head, with the neck which is not stretchable yet. So this is our character with the base rig, and now we need just to make this stretchy. So to do that, we're going to use the puppet tool on the limbs we want to stretch. So let's just solo the layers of the leg to create more easily the puppet pins. So on the left thigh, let's just add a puppet pin at each end of the layer. And so that it stretches correctly, we need to switch the puppet engine to the legacy mode. And this is controlling the stretch of the limbs. So let's do that on each layer of the legs. Sometimes when you switch the puppet engine to legacy, the puppet tool doesn't do anything anymore, it's broken. If that happens, just save the project and open it again, or reopen the same project. And after that, it should work correctly. So now the puppet pins are ready. We can just select them to create Duik pins to control them. So just select all the pins at once, and in Duik, in the Links and Constraint panel, click on Add Pins. And finally, we just need to adjust the parenting of the layers. Let's unparent the layers of the leg to parent the pins to the bones. This can also be done automatically with Duik, with the Link Art feature. Here, we have not named the puppet pins, so we need to parent them using their location. So don't click, but alt-click on the Link Art button, and Duik parents according to their locations to the corresponding bones. And now, the leg is now stretchable. And you can use these side effects to rotate and have a foreshortening on the leg. Let's just hide the pins, and finally do the same with the neck. Select the layer, isolate it to create a couple of puppet pins, switch the engine to legacy mode, select the pins, and in the links and constraint panel, add Duik pins. Unparent the layer to parent the pins instead, using Alt-click on the Link Art button in the Bones panel. Let's just hide these new pins, and now the neck is stretchy. This is the main rig of the character, which is ready, and we just need to rig the antenna so that it bounces automatically, and how we can use the Kleaner to animate this character. That's what you're going to learn if you follow the official and comprehensive video course about Duik Ángela.